Hello everyone and welcome back to the garage. Today I'm going to adjust the valve clearance and replace the alternator belt on this BMW R1150GS. Let's get straight into it. So I'm going to start with the left side and remove the cylinder guard held on by 3 bolts. Pop off the spark plug cover and remove the coil. Now I'm using a coil removal tool here, but if you don't have one you could just try to gently pull it out. Just make sure you keep the coil straight. Bending it while pulling it out might damage it. And ready to take the spark plug out. Now this is the best spark plug socket you can use on these bikes. It's very long and it's quite thin-walled. If you ever had a regular spark plug socket stuck in the cylinder head behind the seal on one of these bikes, you'll know why. And here's the spark plug out. The tip doesn't look too bad, but the back end of it is quite rusty. It's probably been in there for quite some time. And ready to remove the cover held on by 4 bolts. Gently tap it to break the seal and pull it off. Now I'm gonna do the same thing real quick on the right side of the bike. Spark plug is just as rusty. And here we go, I've got the rockers exposed on both sides. And normally I would just put the bike in last gear and just spin the rear wheel to get it to top that center, but in this case, because I'm also gonna check and replace the alternator belt, I'm gonna take this cover off and just use a ratchet or a spanner on the nut of the pulley and turn the engine that way. Now if you've seen the first video where I inspect the bike, I mentioned when you rev it suddenly it's got a squeak coming from the front end, and I assumed at that point it's a loose alternator belt. The service history doesn't indicate that it's been ever replaced or maybe not even checked, so I'll find out what's hiding behind this cover. I'm expecting a pretty loose belt here, maybe quite an old one as well. And here you can see the belt. It's actually not as old as I thought, but it is quite loose. You're supposed to inspect and adjust the tension on these belts every 6,000 miles if I remember correctly, and I suspect this hasn't been done in a while, but it's gonna get a new belt anyway. And now I'm just gonna pop out this inspection plug, and inside I'm gonna see the flywheel and the top dead center marks. There we go, I'm at top dead center. I'm just gonna double check the rockers are both loose on the cylinder I'm working on. If they're not, I'm just gonna turn the engine over a complete revolution and check again. So let's see what we've got. First exhaust valve is quite tight. Second one is quite tight as well. And intake valves, one is loose and one is just a bit too tight. Now it's quite important to mention you need 4 feeler gauges to actually adjust the valve clearance properly on these bikes. You cannot just do it with 1 feeler gauge and just move around, because as soon as you touch one of the valves it's going to affect the other ones as well, both intake and exhaust. So by doing it that way you'll probably never adjust this properly. So get 4 feeler gauges, 0.3 for the exhaust and 0.15 for the intake, pop them all in. And as a general rule I start with the tight valves. I loosen the tight valves first, and then most of the time the loose ones will tighten up to some degree by themselves without any adjustment. And I'm not doing that in this case. I'm starting with the loose one just because that's what I felt at the time. But anyway, yeah, just move around them until you get them all just right. And as a general rule of what I'm looking for when I adjust these, I want the feeler gauge to go in and basically sit there wherever I leave it. If under the weight of the handle it just swings down, I considered that to be just a bit too loose, so I just want the feeler gauge to slide in nicely, but just stay there when I release it. And here we go, all 4 of them are just perfect. So I've just turned the engine over 2 complete revolutions to get the left cylinder on top dead center on the compression stroke again. I've double checked all my clearances and I'm gonna torque the nuts down. Now this is not the ideal torque wrench for it, I should have one with a crowfoot, but I've tightened them with a spanner while holding the center with an Allen key. And I'm just double checking that they're all at the correct torque, and generally they're fine. They don't move when I do this because I get them pretty tight with the spanner, but yeah, this is not exactly the correct way of doing it. Clearance is fine, so we're done with the cylinder. I can put the cover and everything back on. I'm not going to put the spark plug in yet because I still want to turn the engine over for the other side. So here I am on the right side now, just checking that my rockers are moving freely, which they are, and I'm checking the clearances. I've got one exhaust valve just a bit tight but pretty good. The bottom exhaust valve is quite loose, and both intake valves are not too bad. So I've got them all just right, turned the engine 2 revolutions again and double check the clearance, see if it's still the same, and proceed to torquing the lock nuts in the same manner, and we're done with this side as well. Put the rocker cover back on and torque the bolts to spec. Brand new spark plug going in. Pop the coil back on. And the cover on top. New spark plug for the other side as well, of course. Give the cover a bit of a clean, and I can put the cylinder guards back on. Now these bikes came with 2 different alternators, a Denso unit which requires a 595mm long belt, and in this case a Bosch alternator which requires a 611mm long belt. So it's quite important you know which belt you need so you know what to order, and you can see right there on the back of the alternator who the manufacturer is. But if you want to find that out before you remove the tank, so you can order your parts in advance, in the inspection video on this bike I've demonstrated how to check that with the tank on by using an inspection mirror. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and loosen the 3 nuts and bolts that secure the alternator in place. It might need a bit of a tap to lower it and give the belt some slack. And now you can just pop the belt off, starting with the alternator pulley. It's always easier to take it off of the smallest pulley first. And having a quick look at the belt, it's actually in pretty good condition. I'm quite certain this has been replaced at some point not too long ago. It just probably hasn't been recorded in the service history, but it probably wasn't readjusted in a long time, or maybe it was never tensioned properly. but we're gonna put a new belt on it anyway. Now the proper way to set the correct tension on these belts is by applying an 8 Nm torque on the back of the adjusting bolt. So you need to set your torque wrench to reverse, and you need to make sure your torque wrench actually registers the torque in reverse. A lot of them don't, so in case yours does, you need an Allen bit on the back of that bolt. Set a torque of 8 Nm, that will tension the belt, and just torque the other 2 nuts and 1 bolt to spec. If your torque wrench does not work in reverse, you can remove the nut on the front of the bolt, and there is a BMW special tool to actually apply the torque to the front of the bolt, which does not require your torque wrench to be in reverse then, it's just the normal way. But instead of getting that BMW tool, you could either just make yourself something like a dome nut might work, which will bottom out on the bolt before it actually starts to clamp the alternator, or maybe something like a long nut and a bolt on the other side, so to sort of lock it in place and then apply the torque to it. You can find different ways of doing it, it's not that complicated. It's also worth mentioning this has cured the squeaky front end of the engine while accelerating, so it was just a loose belt causing that. So the belt is just right now. You can still move it around a bit. A belt that's too tight will put too much load on the bearings and also wear itself out, but it is quite a bit tighter than before. I cannot twist it 180 degrees like I could do with the other one. And that's it guys. Thanks for watching and see you again next time.